Hello everyone, I'm Stephanie Komashin and this is Academic Writing Flip 4. Today's topic is logical arguments. We started to touch on this topic in Flip 2, so let's briefly review what we already learned. We learned the definition of an argument, which is a series of statements in which there are the conclusion and the premises that support the conclusion. We also learned the definition of an assertion, which is a statement, but we haven't used evidence, we don't have warranted reasons. We need to replace the assertions with logical arguments. If we do this, our readers will be able to be convinced by our conclusion because they are convinced by the reasons that we give. These reasons are premises, or we could call them subclaims, and the conclusion we can call a claim. I showed you this example last time, the premise, conclusion pattern. I showed you squirrels like to eat nuts, peanuts are nuts, squirrels like to eat peanuts. Today we're going to look at a lot of examples like this so that you can make your own logical arguments using the correct rules of logic. Remember that a statement can be true or false. And ideally, we can check, we can verify in the real world whether or not it is true or false. Now this is today's important point. Logical and illogical are different from true and false. You might assume that logical means true and illogical means false, but that is not correct. Actually, logical and illogical are about following the rules of logic correctly. It's not really related to true and false, so we want to keep these separate in our way of thinking. Being logical and being true or false are different. Premises and conclusions are true or false. Please remember that. Arguments are not true or false. They are illogical or they are logical, depending on whether they follow the rules of logic. If they follow the rules of logic, they connect the premises to the conclusion in the correct way. Because being logical and being true or false are different, it is possible to have a variety of logical arguments, arguments that follow the rules of logic. For example, all true premises and a true conclusion, or one or more false premises and a true conclusion, or one or more false premises and a false conclusion. Even if it's partly false, even if it's completely false, that has nothing to do with whether it's logical or not. It can still be logical if it is following the rules correctly. For this reason, we can have illogical statements, illogical arguments of true premises and a true conclusion. In this case, even if the premises are true, and even if the conclusion happens to be true, the conclusion doesn't follow from the premises according to the rules, so it's still illogical. And we don't want to write our arguments in this way. We want to avoid illogical arguments as best as we possibly can. So we don't want to make an illogical argument that happens to have true premises and happens to have a true conclusion, but the logic didn't work. It's also possible to make an illogical argument that has true premises and a false conclusion, or to make one that has false premises but a true conclusion, or one that has false premises and a false conclusion. All of these are possibilities. We want to avoid all of these possibilities. We want to make logical arguments and avoid illogical arguments. So let's look at a lot of examples. I think this will help you to make your own logical arguments and avoid illogical arguments. So first, let's look at examples with logical arguments that have two true statements. So premise 1, Frozen is a movie. Yes, this is true. We can verify, we can check in the real world to find out that this is true. And premise 2, Frozen was made by Disney. This is also something. There's evidence in the real world that we can check. So premise 1, Frozen is a movie. Movie, you can see, is surrounded by an orange box to indicate premise 1. And Premise 2, made by Disney, is surrounded by a blue box to indicate Premise 2. So number 1, Premise 1, plus number 2, Premise 2, both go down into the conclusion. The conclusion is 1 plus 2. We want all of the important information of 1 and all of the information of 2 both to go into the conclusion. Conclusion 1 plus 2, which you can see indicated by the green lettering. Frozen is a Disney movie. This is also true. We can check in the real world to find out. And it follows logically from the premises that we have. Premise 1, movie went into the conclusion. And Premise 2, made by Disney, also went into the conclusion. So the conclusion is 1 plus 2. This is the type of argument we want to make. Premises go into the conclusion and don't lose any of the information. All of the information should go into the conclusion. Premise 1 and Premise 2 are both true. The conclusion is also true. So in this case, we can see the conclusion logically follows from both premises 1 plus 2. But let's look at another example of the same pattern. Also, logical argument with 2 true statements. Here we have Premise 1. Hokkaido is larger than Aomori. In real life, we can check. We can measure, we can use maps, we can make sure that this is correct. And Premise 2. Aomori is larger than Tokyo. We can also verify this in the real world. Conclusion is 1 plus 2. If Hokkaido is larger than Aomori, the orange box goes into the conclusion. And the blue box also goes into the conclusion. Aomori is larger than Tokyo. Therefore, Hokkaido is larger than Tokyo. This is true in the real world. But the important point, more than being true, is that it is logical. Premise 1 into the conclusion, Premise 2 into the conclusion, and together we made a logical argument that follows the rules of logic. We can follow the rules of logic even when the statements are false. So let's take a look at this kind of example. Here it says Premise 1, Frozen is a TV series. This is not true in the real world. In the real world, Frozen is a movie. There is no TV series, at least not so far. Premise 2, Frozen was made by Studio Ghibli. This is also false. We can check in the real world to make sure Frozen was made by Disney, and Studio Ghibli makes wonderful movies, but they do not include Frozen. So both of these statements are false. However, if we put the orange box into the conclusion and the blue box into the conclusion, then we have our green conclusion 1 plus 2. Frozen is a Studio Ghibli TV series. It has the information of 1 plus 2 and no new information. So it is following the rules of logic. Premise 1 and Premise 2 are both false. The conclusion is also false. But this is the important point. The conclusion logically follows. It follows the rules of logic. So let's look at another example of the same thing. Logical argument with 2 false statements. So Premise 1. Ms. Komoshin hates flying squirrels. This is definitely false. If you know me, you know that flying squirrels are my favorite animal in the entire world. So it's definitely false. And Premise 2. Baymax is a flying squirrel. This we can check in the real world. It is also false. Baymax is the main character, or one of the main characters, of Big Hero 6. If you watch the movie, you can easily see he is not a flying squirrel. This is also false. But the conclusion takes 1 and 2, puts them both into the conclusion with no new information, so it's following the rules of logic to say, Ms. Komoshin hates Baymax. Both parts of the sentences were incorrect in terms of being truthful. They were false. However, they are correct in terms of logic. They are logical. So let's look at the case of a logical argument that has 1 true statement and 1 false statement together. Then what happens to the conclusion? In this example, Premise 1, Frozen is a movie. Yes, this is true, and we can check in the real world. Premise 2, Frozen was made by Studio Ghibli. No, this is false. We know that Frozen was made by Disney, and Studio Ghibli made different movies. The conclusion, 1 plus 2, Frozen is a Studio Ghibli movie. Because premise 2 was false, then this conclusion is false. However, it is following the rules of logic because 1 plus 2 both went into the conclusion. Let's look at another example. Logical argument. 1 true statement and 1 false statement both go into the conclusion. Premise 1. Chocolate is sweet. Yes, in the real world we can test this. We can use our sense of taste and we can know that this is true. Premise 2. Chocolate is a vegetable. No, it's not. Everyone would agree it is not a vegetable. So we can poll or we can go to the grocery store and see which section of the market is the chocolate in. It's not in the vegetable section. We can make sure in the real world. So if we say chocolate is sweet, it's true. If we say chocolate is a vegetable, it's false. But if we put both of those pieces of information into the conclusion, we can make a logical argument when we say chocolate is a sweet vegetable. It's false. In the real world, that's not true, but it is logical. It followed the rules of logic. Sometimes we can make fun and humorous examples by using 1 true statement and 1 false statement. So here's an example of that. Premise 1, this is true. Seiya reads a dictionary. Premise 2, a dictionary is Seiya's friend. In reality, this cannot be true. But if we put the 2 pieces of information together, premise 1 and premise 2, into the conclusion, then we get a conclusion that has logical consistency. It follows the rules of logic to say, Seiya reads his friend. It's a bit silly, it's a bit bizarre, it's humorous, it's funny. But it does follow the rules of logic, so it's a logical sentence, even if it doesn't really make sense to us to think, how can Seiya be friends with his dictionary? How can he read his dictionary? Of course, it sounds like fantasy, but the sentence is logical. Sometimes you will see arguments in the academic writing that you are reading for your research, or when you are writing your own academic writing, this kind of case may come up. So please be aware, when there's a logical argument that has 1 true statement, everyone already agrees. It's generally accepted as a fact. But there's also a premise that not everyone agrees on. It's undetermined. It's unclear. We're not sure if it's true or if it's false. So here's an example. Premise 1, Frozen was made by Disney. Yes, this is a fact. Everyone agrees. Premise 2, Frozen is the world's best movie. Well, this is an opinion. Some people will agree. Maybe most people will not agree that it is the best movie in the whole world of all time. So premise 1 is a fact. It's true. Premise 2, it might be true, but it might be false. We haven't decided yet. So in that case, the conclusion, where we do 1 plus 2, Disney made the world's best movie. It might be true, it might not be true. So it's undetermined so far. But what's important is that the orange box and the blue box both went into the conclusion, and we have a logical argument, which said Disney made the world's best movie. If you wanted to do this kind of argument in your own paper, maybe you have 1 premise everyone already agrees. And maybe you have 1 premise that's your original idea, or not so many people would agree with you, or at least they won't initially agree with you, and you need to convince them. So maybe it's undetermined for your readers whether your second premise is true or not. In that case, you would need to give more reasons, more premises to back up, to support your premise 2. And if you did that, then maybe they will also agree with your conclusion. We could say premise 2 is like a subclaim, and then they'd be able to say, yes, I already agree with premise 1, you have convinced me of premise 2, and together, now I can believe your conclusion. Let's look at another example of a logical argument that has 1 true statement, basically everyone agrees. And 1 statement, it's undetermined, not everyone agrees. So number 1, Sherlock Holmes is smarter than Dr. Watson. If you have read Sherlock Holmes or watched the movies or TV series, you would know that Sherlock Holmes is very intelligent. And he has a friend, Dr. Watson, who is a great character, but pretty much everyone agrees from the literature, from the canon of the films or the TV shows, that Dr. Watson, even though he may be smart, he's not as smart as Sherlock Holmes. Sherlock Holmes is smarter. Basically, everyone who reads this story knows that. So we could say this is a generally accepted fact, that Sherlock Holmes is smarter than Dr. Watson. The premise number 2 we have here, Dr. Watson is smarter than Superman. Well, Superman is from a completely different story. These characters have never met, they are not in the same world. So, is Dr. Watson smarter than Superman? Yes or no? Some people would agree, yes, and some people will disagree. So it's undetermined. Maybe you want to make some kind of argument like this, where premise 1, everyone agrees, and premise 2 is your unique idea. Not everyone agrees with you so far, but you need to convince them. But if we put both of these into the conclusion, then we get Sherlock Holmes is smarter than Superman. It follows the rules of logic. It's a logical argument, and that's what we're trying to do. Now let's look at the case when it's a little bit more complicated, a little bit more interesting. So this is a logical argument with 2 true statements. Premise number 1, K is 21 years old. So let's imagine we have a character. His name is K, and he is 21 years old. In that case, premise 1 is true. K is 21 years old. Let's imagine that this is true about our character K. And premise 2, K has a twin. So let's imagine in our imaginary character, his life started on the same day with his twin. It's true. Then if we put premise 1 and premise 2 into the conclusion, we get a logical conclusion which says K's twin is 21 years old. The reason that we can do this here, it follows the rules of logic, but it's doing something a little bit different from the previous examples. Actually, we have a premise 3. It's hidden. Premise 3 is generally accepted, well accepted fact, general knowledge, which is that a twin has the same birthday, the same age as his or her twin. So when we know K is 21 years old and K has a twin, then we immediately can conclude that K's twin is the same age as K. So if K is 21, K's twin is also 21. The reason we can do that is because premise 3 is our information, our knowledge, our facts about twins. Twin will be the same age. So 21 and twin, so the twin is also 21. We can do it without writing out the premise 3, just because everyone already knows what the word twin means. In the definition of twin, this is part of that definition, so we can put it into the conclusion. 21 and twin, and everyone can agree with this conclusion. It's following the rules of logic. Okay, now let's look at some examples of illogical arguments. We want to avoid illogical arguments. So first, think about this example. What is wrong with this? Premise 1. She likes cherry blossoms. Let's imagine our imaginary hypothetical character. She likes cherry blossoms. So this is true. And premise 2. Cherry blossoms are spring flowers. This is true in the real world. We can verify spring is the season in which cherry blossoms bloom. So this is also true. Conclusion 1 plus 2. She likes spring. Something went wrong. Premise 1, premise 2 tried to go into the conclusion, but something is broken. Something is wrong. Something is lost, and it's not logical. What happened? So, in this conclusion, she likes spring. This is also true about our character. She likes the season of spring. But this is not logical. It does not follow the rules of logic. The reason is because premise 1 did go into the conclusion. You can see the orange arrow. But premise 2 did not correctly go into the conclusion. It is necessary to put all of the information of premise 1 plus all of the information of premise 2 into the conclusion. we cannot lose any information. But here in premise 2, the word flowers has disappeared. It's not in the conclusion. So this means that part of the premise has been lost. So the logic has been not kept according to the rules. This conclusion, it happens to be true that our character likes the season of spring. But actually that information was not here and here. We only know she likes a kind of flower, which is cherry blossoms. And more specifically, cherry blossoms are spring flowers. This is about the type of flower, the variety of flower is a spring flower. So flower is what we're talking about here, not the season of spring. She likes spring is a different topic. She likes cherry blossoms. What are they? They are spring flowers. So she likes spring flowers would be correct. If flowers correctly goes into the conclusion, then we'll have a logical argument. So it's possible to fix. As it is, this conclusion is missing the part of the blue flowers, the main point here. But if we put spring flowers here, then we can change. It is 1 plus 2. And then, in this case, the conclusion logically follows. It follows the rules of logic correctly. We want to make sure always all of the information from 1 and 2 into the conclusion. Also, no new information in the conclusion. If information was not here and not here, it cannot go into the conclusion. So here, does she like spring as a season? Maybe she likes fall. Maybe she likes winter. That information is not here, so we cannot put spring into the conclusion. Let's look at another example. This one we were able to fix. However, it's not always so easy to fix an illogical argument. Let's look at another case. This also has 2 true statements. Premise 1, Japanese people like desserts. We can check in the real world whether or not this is true. Let's say that it's true. If we do a survey, a questionnaire, we can ask Japanese people if they like desserts. We can check the sales records of desserts that are sold in convenience stores or sold in restaurants or sold in the market, the ingredients for making desserts at home. We can check this data in the real world. So let's say this is true. Japanese people like desserts. And premise 2, pudding is a dessert. That is true. We can verify it in the real world. So what is the problem with this example? We can see the words in the orange box went into the conclusion, and the word pudding went into the conclusion. But why is this broken? Why does this not follow the rules of logic? What's wrong? Here we can see we have the blue arrow, so pudding went in correctly. But something is wrong about premise 1. Japanese people like pudding is not a logical conclusion from 1 plus 2. Why? The reason is that pudding is a dessert, but there's many kinds of desserts. If all Japanese people like all desserts, then we would know that all Japanese people like pudding. But if we don't have the word all, just Japanese people like desserts, maybe they don't like pudding. Maybe they like cake. Maybe they like wagashi. Maybe they like pie. There's many kinds of desserts that are not pudding. So only from this, we don't know. We know Japanese people like desserts, but what kind of desserts? Do they like all desserts in the entire world, in all of history? Every country, every culture's desserts? Maybe not. Do they like pudding? Well, pudding is a dessert, but this doesn't tell us if pudding is included or not. Japanese people like some desserts, but does that include pudding or not? We don't have that information here. In order to fix this into a logical argument, we need to use the word all. So we're talking about all Japanese people and all desserts. If we do that, then we know pudding is included in premise 1. Because pudding is a dessert, if Japanese people like all desserts, then clearly they must like pudding. So in that case, if we have all, then we would be able to make a logical conclusion of 1 plus 2. It follows the rules of logic. We were able to fix the logic but actually our conclusion is false. So this one was not so easy to deal with as compared to the spring flowers example. Let's look at another example, an illogical argument with two true statements. Let's imagine our character, Yamamoto-san. She took her cell phone to her friend's apartment. So in our scenario, this is true. Premise 2, Yamamoto-san lost her cell phone. That's not good, but in our story, it's true. So premise 1 and premise 2 are both true in our scenario, in our scene. But this conclusion does not follow the rules of logic. It's illogical. It says Yamamoto-san lost her cell phone at her friend's apartment. Let's say this is true, but why does this conclusion not follow from the premises? What went wrong? What changed? What didn't go into the conclusion or was added into the conclusion? Why is this illogical? The problem is, in premise 1, we have the word to. We know as a fact that Yamamoto-san took the cell phone to the apartment. But we don't have any details about what happened at the apartment. Conclusion says at. At meaning Yamamoto-san lost her cell phone while she was in her friend's apartment. But that information is not in 1 and 2. In 1, we know the cell phone went to the apartment. But we don't know when, and we don't know where Yamamoto-san lost the cell phone. It's possible she lost it at the apartment, but it's also possible she lost it after she left from the apartment. We know she lost it, and we know it went to the apartment, but we don't know when and where. So we cannot make this conclusion that it was lost at the apartment. That might be very likely, it might be probable, a good chance that she lost it there. But in premise 1 and 2, we don't have that information. So we cannot make a logical argument to say it was at the apartment. This is illogical, even if it might be true. Let's look at one more example. The number of tourists to Japan is increasing. So premise 1, yes, we can check the data. We can look at the immigration records. We can look at the records of all of the tourist sites in Japan. Maybe their numbers have increased since in the past. So we can check in the real world. And premise 2, the number of Chinese tourists is increasing. So it is true, the number of people from China who travel is increasing. But this conclusion has a problem. Why is this conclusion illogical? It says the number of Chinese tourists to Japan is increasing. Actually, this is true, but it does not follow from 1 plus 2. Why? Why does this not follow the rules of logic? Please think about it. The reason is that the number of tourists to Japan is increasing. But where are they from? Maybe they're tourists from Nigeria. Maybe they're tourists from Argentina. Maybe they're tourists from Norway. We don't know. In premise 1, it doesn't tell us where they are from. Maybe Chinese people are included in the increase, but maybe they aren't. We don't know. Premise 2, the number of Chinese tourists is increasing. In other words, the number of Chinese who go for tourism to other countries is increasing. But where do they go? They could go anywhere in the entire world. Maybe they are increasing in going to the UK. Maybe they're increasing in going to Russia. But it doesn't say in premise 2, where are they going? We don't know. Maybe some of them go to Japan, but maybe not. Just from 1 and 2, we cannot know if the number of Chinese tourists coming to Japan is increasing or not. The number of tourists to Japan is increasing, but who are they? They could be from any country, maybe not including China. Chinese are increasingly traveling abroad, but where are they going? Where's their destination? It could include Japan, but maybe not. Premise 1 and 2 don't tell us. So premise 1 is who is coming to where? To Japan. Premise 2 is who is going to where? We don't know. So we cannot say as a conclusion that the number of Chinese tourists to Japan is increasing just based on 1 plus 2. that would be an illogical conclusion. I hope that this flip has helped you to understand a basic format, a basic pattern of logical arguments. Please practice making your own version so that you can use it when you write your academic writing papers. And if you feel that you need more practice or you would like to go more in depth, get more details, get a better understanding and deeper, broader understanding of logical arguments, actually, this is only one type. There's actually many patterns, many types of logical arguments that we use. So if you would like to learn more, please feel free to watch the critical thinking flips also on YouTube. You can find the link on this webpage. They have a lot more information, examples, and you can practice to use these types as well as other patterns in your own writing. So please enjoy.